You're listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. With the help of successful individuals across industries, Dirk breaks down the unknown parts of every vocation while highlighting the importance of finding a career where you can leverage your natural skills, passions, and interests. Now here's your host, Dirk Nevelle.
Hey everyone, this is Dirk Nevelle. Welcome to my podcast. On with me today is Jim Fuda. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So I haven't known Jim very long, but I met Jim recently and through another friend and one of my podcast guests. Jim, I will let him articulate and elaborate what it is he does. But what was interesting for me is Jim is involved with human trafficking to help change that. It's a very timely conversation and topic right now, especially with the Freedom movie that just came out from Jim Caviezel. And I really wanted him to come on for two reasons. One is I wanted him to articulate and really help the audience understand what's going on with this topic. And also just to give a lot of color around what it's like to do what he does day in and day out with very heavy topics, very, things that a lot of us might not be able to go home and just kind of clear our head. I mean, would stay with us. So I think there's I don't want to call it a skill set, but there's definitely something that Jim has and others that allow him to do such heavy work and then maybe go home and kind of, let it go. So I'll let him talk a little bit about that. Jim, why don't you just kind of start off talking about what it is you do, maybe a little bit about your experience, how you got into it, and we'll just kind of take it from there.
Sure. How it started is a 33-year career with the sheriff's office. When I retired in 2006, I was in special operations. I ran the hostage negotiations team for 25 years. So you build a skill set of bonding with people in more of a crisis situation. And when I first started with the negotiation stuff, there wasn't a lot out about it in the early 80s. And I read Herb Cohen's You Can Negotiate Anything, business negotiations. And how I kind of put that in place is that you're still building relationships, but with a higher price value, human life. So that was part of my career. I retired in 2006 and went to work for our federal government. And I worked in Pakistan, Indonesia, and I lived in Banja Luka, Bosnia for 14 months. And it was at that time that I learned more about that Eastern European down into South Asia, which would be Pakistan where I worked, and how the Balkan route comes from, a lot of it starts in South Asia through the Middle East into the Balkan route, and learned about how the corruption and some of the human misery that goes through these particular countries and what people have to deal with. And when I came home, a reason I came home from that job then, the time as my mom died, I'm the oldest in an Italian family, and it was a time to come help take care of Dad as well. And so when I came home, took over with Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound, our local program here. It covers 4 to 6 counties and with a base of about 4.2 million people. Crime Stoppers, what it does is it's kind of a liaison between the police, the media, and the public. Detectives come to us with, hey, we need help on this homicide, let's say we've had, and then I go to the media and say, okay, who wants this story? And then we put it out there looking for anonymous tips. And we started using a tip app in November of 2017 that changed the ballgame. A tip app where people can report crime anonymously through their phone. And I always joke, our tips quadrupled overnight, and our arrests more than doubled. And why? We're in the gaming generation. I joke I can't get my 17-year-old granddaughter to talk to me on the telephone, but she texts me back in 30 seconds. So taking that concept and how well it works in our country is how that could be utilized from the environment I worked in overseas, where corruption is the leading cause. And so we picked 7 crimes human trafficking, terrorism, illicit trade, arms dealing, drug smuggling, cybercrime, and bank fraud. But let's face it, the key here for me is the humanity and the suffering in the human slave trade. But we figured that all those crimes are corruption based, partially connected because of the corruption side of things. So I went back with my then partner, Merle Carter, who began the Crime Stoppers program here in the Northwest, and went back to Banja Luka, had trusted policemen there, had them bring 4 countries together. We did 1 press release and had 47 tips. So we learned 2 things from that beta test. 1 is a local program can't sustain it. And 2, Bosnia is not the place to start because Bosniaks, Muslim, Croats, Catholics, and Serb Orthodox, if one likes it, the other 2 didn't. So we decided to go to Serbia. They're kind of the leader in the Balkans anyway, in that part of the world. So it took us 2 years to build the relationships and got things started over there. I actually had 3 trusted Serbs associated with a minister of the interior. They used military ranks. One was a general, a couple of majors, and to learn the operational side of things in February 2020, 3 weeks later, COVID hit. So we started back November of last year, went back to Serbia, and also Moldova. They got a hold of us because of the influx of the refugees coming in from the war in the Ukraine. Is that it brought a whole new level of corruption, and you have to think is that yes, there's human tragedy going on, but there's always people there to take advantage of it. So they were overwhelmed, and so we're starting a program. There, we were back again in May to go through all the red tape and meet with the appropriate people, get one on their media to sell it to the public. And so just this last week, the app went live in both locations, which was a huge ordeal, dealing with Apple and the Android business and all that to get things open. So but at this stage of my life, it's the point where in the movie Sound of Freedom, they use the term God's children are not for sale. And I want to add to that is that it's the right thing to do. Having come from the career that I did, no one should ever hire me at age 21, impressionable, but I did. We didn't have the trainings that there is out today. We didn't have the emotional support of things back then. PTSD is real. And this is one of my outlets to satisfy the knowledge that I gained through my career. I mean, I was a beat cop during the Green River era. My beat was the airport strip although I knew most of those girls on a first name basis. And, I went to, I'll tell you one story. I went to one girl who's known as Bones 19 for 3 or 4 years till they DNA identified her. And I knew her as Case Ann Lee. And I went to that. I was at that scene of her bones back in my young cop days. So this is something that's become a mission for me, and take the expertise that I learned in those other avenues and put it. And I don't have to answer to a police chief. I answer to a board of directors, and they help steer the direction that we're taking this. And the other thing is with Bosnia, not the place to start, is that we formed another group called Crime Stoppers Global Solutions, where we brought think tank people from around the globe that know the Crime Stoppers concept, some that are in that field. We got an MI6 guy out of London. We've got one of our guys that I can't really even talk about that is still doing some missions, but is on our board. Sharp people. And so what has happened with our group, the downside is what's happened is the fundraising side of things, because this is a crime that we call hidden in plain sight. Might see a streetwalker on the street, and they said, well, why didn't you just run away? Because she's under control. These people are smart. They threaten them. In many cases, they hold their passports. So they're not free to leave. They're threatened. Their families are threatened. So there's more to it. And back in the Green River day, we weren't taught that stuff. It's definitely out there now. And now with, like I said, with this movie stuff that's just come out, it's putting it in people's faces so they are aware of it. I always tell, in fact, I give a group to presentations and to bring it home, I say, okay, how many of you guys get pedicures? And the hands come up, and I say, well, look, is the same girl working on your feet every 3-4 months that you go? And does the woman on your feet, the girl on your feet, even talk to you, or does she talk to the native language to the owner, and the owner's the only one that talks to you? And if that's the case, you are witnessing human trafficking. Someone's holding that girl's credentials, and somebody is threatening her or her family that she's not there. The next time you go back, she's not there. There's another girl, because they rotate them around these little nail salons. So that's another form of human trafficking.
So I want to thank you. I want to get deeper into that. But before we do that, I kind of want to provide some color around what is it like to be in your world, like in terms of what are your days, your weeks, your nights like. But before we do that, going backwards, there's young adults that are watching this, and everyone's unique. Everyone has their own skills, passions, interests, etc. What were yours? Like, what were you like in high school? Were you like a rule follower? Like, I'm going to save the world and I'm going to be a cop? Like, what was it that got you into law enforcement? Did you jump into it right out of college or high school?
Well, that's a funny question. I went to O'Day High School back then with the Irish Christian Brothers. Yep. And I was one of those guys that kind of walked a fine line. I mean, was a little more adventurous on some things, and they kept me straight, and I didn't get into any trouble. And it was because of that. And then I was one of the last draftees. So I went in the military because I was drafted out of college. They made me an MP because I was in a criminology course. And so I did that. And I was just fortunate at the time that I was getting discharged, I was able to test for the sheriff's office at 20 and a half. They don't hire till you're 21. So during the process of the 7 steps it takes to get hired, I turned 21, got discharged, and got hired in a 10-day period. So I'm still the youngest county deputy that was ever hired, because of that, just how that flow came out. And I actually worked in the jail for 3 months before I was even before there was even a state academy for me to go to. So that was 73. I was hired, and in early 74, I went to the state academy before I was put on the street.
Yeah, I'm asking because it seems like a lot of times people have a natural calling, or they're kind of they're leaning towards a certain direction. It feels like law enforcement was always kind of, to some extent, part of your DNA.
Yeah, and it was one kind of the excitement. I had some friends that were older than me that worked for the Seattle Police Department, and they would let me come around and ride when I was 18, and great guys. And then I just got a sense that it wasn't all just about getting the bad guys. It was about helping people and turning sense out of a cluster, and then doing the best you could, giving those people to the services that were needed, and then moving on to the next cluster. So I very much enjoyed that, and I was good at it. I didn't like detective work. Detective work was too boring for me, following the other clues and things like that. I was more of the first responder, and then was able to even feed into more of that when I got into special operations. I joked, the big boys with toys. It was a great assignment.
So, like, if you look in the mirror, you think about, like, okay, what makes me good? Like, what is unique about Jim? And a lot of times we're not used to, like, complimenting ourselves. But if you look at kind of like why you're good at what you do, I'm curious, like what are the skills or the passions or the whatever you want to call it that you're leveraging? Like what makes you good at what you do?
Well, I think one, it's the compassion and the be able to relate to people. In fact, I in the negotiations, what you're taught, you have to represent yourself as a real flesh and blood human being, someone who has wants and needs like everybody else. So you have to get on that relationship level. In fact, I'm talking to a suicidal barricade, a guy that was going to want to kill himself. You have to be able to share of yourself. And that's hard for a lot of cops because they're mostly type A personalities. But to be able to get down on that level and relate to somebody, and that's how you build that bond and that trust. And it just seemed to work well for me.
Well, okay, so let me put it in a different way and tell me if I'm on. So the ability to have compassion for people or groups of people that maybe typically type A type cops would never have compassion for, like the uniqueness of, even when we talked about the human trafficking, and I told you some of the issues that I battle is I'd want to take these guys out. And you were talking about, these are people, humans that maybe went through something when they were children. That compassion for a group that others might want to just eliminate, it seems very important to have in your line of work.
Yeah, and how I like to word that is that you're absolutely right that that's a human being, a bad human being. But the bottom line is, if I use the term, if you take them out, you're no better than them. So let the appropriate justice, go through those steps and then get those people arrested and off the street. And I'm sure in some of these other countries, developing countries that things are going through, is that they are they're being handled in the opposite way that you talked about. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to be back on the Zoom call tomorrow with the South Sudan with a human rights group, and they were in tears the first couple of times we talked with them, because that the Americans would even talk to them and want to help them. But the warlords are killing the men. They're putting women and those wives and girls in sex camps, and they're taking the boys as young as 4 or 5 years old and putting them in work camps. Now, if we can't help with something like that, we're just giving them our technology. But at the same token, there's got to be some type of vetting process, because I don't want my technology being brought to the warlords for their advantage. So that's what we're kind of working through now in Juba, South Sudan, and we'll discuss more of that tomorrow. But that's part of being able to separate the good guys from the bad guys, if you know what I mean.
I do. Okay, so compassion is one. What's another one or two, maybe three things? Again, like, what is it like? You've seen people in your line of work that are probably really good at what they do, like yourself. You've seen people maybe they weren't the right fit. I'm trying to kind of focus on the attributes and skills that make someone really good in your line of work.
Yeah, I think good mental health is very important, because some of the things that you probably see out there are you're going to have to make some sense and process it yourself. The good thing about police work today is there is a lot of wellness out there that they're utilizing today. And another example is when I had a case where I had a guy shoot and kill a 17-year-old girl in front of me. And it was a case of he killed someone on a deadline. And back then, they didn't have post-traumatic stress syndrome intervention stuff where we'd all come together and talk what we're feeling. I had another incident that turned out really bad too, but I took over the team by then, and I put it in our policy that anytime we have something like this, that the team will go through a critical incident stress debriefing, and those actually help that say you're not feeling this all alone or by yourself. But that mental health is good, and I think physical fitness is an important part of it as well. That kind of all blends in together, because that stops less issues in my eyes on the street. There's a pyramid of use of force, and one is just your command presence, the broad bottom command presence, and then it goes, to the baton or the mace or the taser or whatever it might be. And the last little bit at the top is deadly force. If you have that command presence, is that, and know how to talk to people, with compassion and to be able to relate, is that you're not going to fight very much. That's definitely true. But when that time comes, that let's say you go to a shooting call, or like now we're seeing these active shooter calls, is that you will have that mindset, along with the training, that you can overcome that threat with like I said, with the proper mindset, the mental strength, your training, and your physical abilities, and because the idea is that you want to be able to go home to your families each and every night. I mean, that's the number one priority.
Yeah. Recently I interviewed my cousin who just retired. He's a cop, and my uncle, his father was a sheriff in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I was talking to him about getting into police work, law enforcement. And one of the things he had mentioned that I wanted to get your thoughts on, he goes, if you are going to go down this road, you have to realize the eyes or the camera are always on you 24/7. So you're basically, you've got to follow protocol. You got to do things the right way. My question is, sometimes when you're dealing with a situation, I don't know if this is the right way to say it. The right way maybe doesn't translate to success. Like sometimes you've got to roll up your sleeves, and I guess I'm trying to ask it, and I'm not doing a good job, but like to be effective in your line of work, sometimes it feels like being political, or trying to do it where you had a video camera on you won't be effective. Like, right. Where's the line between being effective and being bending the knee and being political?
Well, here's I get what you're saying, and what it is, use of force, justified or not, is never pretty, and it's going to look bad on tape. Just I guess I would just suggest don't escalate it. And you could have everything calmed down, and somebody comes in with a smart mouth, and then it all blows up again. And I'd worked with cops like that in the past. One that didn't last very long on the department, because he was one of those guys that, and I'm going to speak frankly here, is one of those guys that appeared to have been the underdog his whole life, through school, through everything, and this was going to be his chance to take it out on the rest of the world, and he didn't last very long. He tried to play a tough guy, and he didn't fare well, and those are not the people we want.
What are the people you want? Like, if someone's listening to you and they're thinking, do I fit? Would I work well? Would I align with this career choice? What are the 2 or 3, 4 ideal fits that you see men and women coming through that would do well in this world?
Well, I think what you have to think about too is that and this is what was one of the questions when I hired on, well, close to 50 years ago now. It is 50 years. I can't believe it. Is that are you willing to work shift work? Are you willing to work nights and weekends and holidays? And so if you are willing to do that, and those are times that you're going to have to give up with your family. And I worked mine out to where we did it at maybe a different day, day before, day after, or whatever is we could do it together. But that's a priority. That's going to take a toll on your personal relationships. But the rewards of doing it, there's something about, I don't know, the night being out and making sense of and going in and helping people and separating the misery that some people go through, and sometimes being people's babysitter. I remember being 22 years old, going to a family fight on Skyway, and some guy says, nothing but a damn punk. He said, if I wanted a kid to settle my family fights, I go wake up my 27-year-old son. Those kinds of things. So you just have to have a comment. Says, well, then why am I here? If you should be able to handle this, then if I'm just some young kid, but I was sent here, so let's make this work. And then you get the guy talking to you, and decrease the tension. But I think that's a key is the knowing, going well into it, some of the things that you're going to have to give up, and you're going to be going to some calls you don't want to go to, and don't know how you're going to be deal with those. A prime example to me is SID deaths, or like I said, or the sexual abuse of minors was always tough for me to go handle, but I think, like I said, positive attitude, knowing you're with a group, the pride in what you do, and the ability to think quickly on your feet and fit what the call you're on, fit that in to the RCW, the Revised Code of Washington, and what constitutes a crime in that, and move that forward. And just be a champion for your community. So
you were in the sheriff, and were you a sheriff or just a cop for how many years?
I did 33 years. I was a sheriff's deputy, and then I was a sergeant that they basically called commanders in special operation, which ran a mainstream unit and then several ancillaries. Okay,
so now you're Crime Stoppers. You're dealing with those 7 issues, primarily human trafficking. You mentioned something about get used to missing birthdays, missing holidays, night shifts. One of the things that I think a lot of young adults don't think about is the lifestyle associated with choosing a career. My dad was a pilot, and I could never be a pilot. I would never want to miss my kids' birthdays, holidays. I want to wake up, go to bed with them. The freedom or the control of my schedule is key. In your first chapter, few chapters of your career, you may not have had the power, the control of your schedule. You had to be open to doing in your world now, in the nonprofit, is it night and day? I mean, do you feel like you can control your schedule? And
it is, I can't control the schedule, but I keep it open 7 days a week if I'm around. And some days I might work 3 hours, some days I might work 10, and some days I may not work at all. But I'll give you an example. My wife and I were just in Europe, and I did a Zoom interview on a homicide deal that happened in Seattle, and I did a Zoom call from my hotel room, and it was one of those things where I had to do my research on it because I'd been gone, and talk with the reporter, and then did the Zoom interview that ended up during that night. I had friends texting me going, I thought you were on vacation. I just saw you on TV, so you have to, so I'm able to adapt, and I'm comfortable with that. And my wife is very flexible with me for me to do that. So it works well for us.
So when duty calls, you have to be ready to roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about compensation? Maybe it's different. Is that a big driver for you? Because if somebody's interested in law enforcement or getting involved, but maybe they have attachment to wanting to make a lot of money. I'm not asking you what you make, but what is compensation structures in your industry?
Well, it's huge now. I remember when I hired on in 1973, the pay was $688 a month. And I was going, God, if I could just break 10 grand a year. And then I was complaining in 2006, the year I retired, I'm complaining if I'm not making 10 grand a month. But it was now with the hiring incentives and with the overtime that's out there, is that you can do very well in this in this line of work. It's not what it used to be. And how, when things were that low way back when, and even on the East Coast was surprisingly was even lower, is that bred corruption inside the ranks, because people couldn't afford to do the job. And so they compensated other ways. Once the pay rates went up, a lot of that corruption went away.
So when you say this line of work, I mean, working for Crime Stoppers versus being a cop, or
I'm talking law enforcement now, strictly law enforcement, not the nonprofit side.
Okay.
So my line of work is, and I'll speak frankly, I get a retirement check from the sheriff's office. I don't pay any medical. My retirement system pays every dime of it. And now that I'm on Medicaid, they take a little bit of chunk of that out of my Social Security every month. However, at the end of the year, that turns out to be like $4,500. I submit that to the county, and they give me a check back for it. So that's one of the benefits of my system. But Crime Stoppers pays me, the local program, and I don't take any money from the international program. That's something that I'm doing extra, and I don't know, maybe with the board that we have, maybe that'll change when we can get fully funded. I don't know, to speak honestly, but it's what I want to do, and that's the passion that drives it. And the local program helps support that with the drive of that technology that we use that got us into the international side of things. And it started, and I'm proud to say it started here in the Northwest.
Yeah, and I don't mean to pry on comp money and your situation. I'm just trying to give a little bit of color around what people can expect if they go down. Yeah, if they go down this road. And it's interesting because, when you have the passion like you do, and you're vested emotionally, maybe money becomes kind of a byproduct, like it's, not as important, right? When you're doing something you truly believe in. As far as something that has surprised you, like, maybe it took you 20, 30 years, 15 years. If there's anything out there that just kind of caught you off guard, like, oh my God, I didn't see this as part of what I do or this career. I wish somebody would have told me this when I was 22. Is there anything like that?
Mine, I decided that's what I wanted to do early on. I may have wanted to go up the ranks a little higher, but I was a single dad too. And I couldn't afford a pay cut, because once you're out of the guild, you don't get overtime. And I had 3 call out units. I had the hostage negotiations team, I had search and rescue, and I had the honor guard that I officially formed in 1991. So I couldn't afford to go, to move up the ranks in that regard. So I might have been less focused on the stuff I was really good at, and got out of my comfort zone a little bit more, and I just never felt of myself as a pencil pusher kind of guy. And but that was my own personality. But I might have, the last 5 years of my career, might have tried to do something a little bit different. But I can't have regrets for that, because what that did is set up my later career. That's what got me. I set up hostage negotiations teams in Pakistan. I set them up in the Republic of Srpska in Bosnia. The five security centers, and so it was these kinds of things that got me the job with the feds in the first place. And I had that set up because I wrote the demonstration management course for Indonesia right after WTO happened here, and so that got my name in the door before I was ready to retire. And so I'd already been to Indonesia a couple of times while I was still working, taking vacation, so I get paid from the feds while I was gone, and then so I had my name there. So I kept my name current with them, and I retired in St. Patrick's Day 2006, and on the 22nd I was on a flight to Pakistan. So it did well for me. So you can set yourself up. I know other cops are doing the same thing. The ones that are like homicide detectives, especially now the cold case ones. They're doing all kinds of great things, helping and podcasts and giving information out to people. Cloyd Steiger, another one, friend that retired as a homicide detective with the Seattle Police Department. He's doing all sorts of things and teaching and getting the word out to people. And in my eyes, a lot of people might like that investigative side, and that's the part that I didn't care for. But there's so many avenues you can take in police work. You don't stay, especially with a larger agency. You don't come in, and if you want to stay on as a beat cop, do it. But you can go off into warrants. You can go off into homicide. You could, other detective jobs. You can work narcotics. You can work bank robbery task forces, or promote up. So there's a variety of different skill sets and different trainings that you can get to hone your skills and do different things as you climb up the ranks.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there might be 10, 20 flavors of people that would do well in law enforcement.
Sure.
That are, an introvert. I mean, someone very social. I mean, there's different opportunities is basically what you're saying.
Right.
If you were to do it again, just curious, like if you were coming out of, I don't know where you went to school, but you said at 20 and a half, you interviewed, I think, which was kind of unique. But if you could turn back the tables a little bit, would you have gone down the same route, or would you have bypassed being a cop and maybe got into something else?
That's a great question, because there's sometimes I think about, especially having worked overseas now, and the kind of that expat being assigned to an embassy with Department of Justice or the State Department, and doing some of those missions in different countries. That I always kind of had that more, I don't know if you want to call it entrepreneurial thing, but rather than the 9 to 5 kind of thing. But I, having worked in that now from my early 50s, is that kind of excited me as well. So I would have liked to have kept my job for 20 years, and maybe because then I'd have been 41 and still able to work some of these assignments in law enforcement, overseas, which would have been pretty cool too, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I've always been fascinated. My brother lived in Egypt for a while, and my dad was a pilot, and I traveled all over the world with my dad. So there's something about other cultures and people that
Right.
I find fascinating. You said something about the incentives nowadays to hire. I guess I want to kind of get behind the curtains a little bit on that. Is it hard to find people? And if so, why is that?
Well, here's what I'm proud to say is our agencies are not lowering, at least around here, for sure. Other ones, I'm not sure, but I don't think they are either, is they're not lowering their standards to take people. And a lot of the qualified people, because of some of the culture that you see that's been going on with the anti-police movement stuff, is that they're finding other paths. I would say, don't let that discourage you. That's cyclical, and it's going to change. And we're seeing it already with our Seattle City Council here, with 5 of them not coming, new people coming in, and the mainstream is starting to get more fed up with the far left and the far right, and those voices are starting to be heard more. And I think we're going to start seeing that in our elections, and things are going to change. And I would say, don't let that be your influence if you feel that this would be a job that you would like to do.
Is there anything you could bring up to say, hey, if you don't like this, then don't even consider this line of work? Is there something that pops up? And maybe another way to ask it is, what is it about this job or career that you don't like, that if you could pick one thing and eliminate it, is there something that you should, again, imagine your 3-year-old son is like, hey, Dad, should I go down this road? And you're like, yeah, but you need to know about this.
Yeah, that part, I'll be honest, is hard with me, is because I had my up days, I had my down days working and stuff, but and some days in the winter you'd wake up and you didn't know whether it was day or night, because you go to bed when it was dark and you wake up when it's dark. But what I felt, I never worked a day in my life. I loved my job that much, is that it was It was always good to me. I enjoyed, I guess I enjoyed the stress because I enjoyed not knowing what was going to happen next. And then going, if I could say this, oh shit, look what we're responding to now. And I can't believe it. Or you stand there with your hands on your hips, go, that's not something you see every day. It's like a reality could be stranger than fiction. It was, but it was not knowing from day to day what was going to happen. Or the rookie, as you're a training officer, says, God, it's really a quiet Friday. And you look at him and you want to choke him because that's what things all go to hell, But it was, I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is there any addiction to the adrenaline rush? Maybe
that could be some of it. And I'm the kind of guy, and maybe there wasn't a word for it back then, ADHD. I don't know, but it was always good for me to have that, and then have the rush, and that's not cocky. That's just a personal feeling, because knowing that I was seasoned enough, knew what I was doing, and out there and trying to do the best that you could, even in between the radio calls, of meeting with people and like, for example, talking with the prostitutes in the Green River era days and trying to help them, get out of here. Or one of them, I'd say, what are you doing out here now? I thought you told me you weren't coming back. I'm just using the phone booth. I said, but you live in Tacoma. There's got to be 2,000 phone booths between here and Tacoma. Why this one? This kind of thing, to where they would go, oh God, there's Fuda again, and he's gonna ride me a little bit. But it was a caring riding. In fact, I would show them the first 7 victims of the Green Road. We had a printout, and I'd show it to him. I says, 3 of these girls could be your sister, the way they look. Oh, he's not going to get me, Jim. And he pulled out a little pocket knife. That was Bones 19. So it was, just trying to do the best you can in the humanity, and just trying to make a difference.
So what's the question? I mean, the question, let me see. I'll just ask it the way I wanted to ask it and see how it comes out. Like, I was going to joke and say, there's got to be something wrong with you, because in the sense where like when you told me the story a couple of weeks ago, when we were talking about the young girl who was, they'd killed her and they took her organs to sell them, like that. I don't know if I could go to bed. I don't know if I could go home and be a good dad, a good husband. I don't know if I could live a normal life if I experienced too many of those scenarios. And I guess, I know you're human and we've talked and you're easy. I mean, you're a normal dude, but how the hell do you separate it? Like, I mean, there's got to be times where you're like, I don't know what, I mean, I can't, did you ever come up to a situation where like, I can't do this anymore?
The closest I came was a shooting I was involved in. And I'll lay the scenario, if I got time to lay the quick scenario on.
Yeah.
Is that it was behind the drugstore on 120th and Des Moines way south in Boulevard Park. And we got a call of a burglary in progress. And I see a guy hanging from the side of a building when I pull up in the middle of the street. Another cop goes behind the building, and the guy drops and runs towards the cop. Well, the cop goes to pull his gun to tell him to go down. They have an altercation. The cop's gun skips across the sidewalk, and I have my shotgun out. And I thought, okay, I can't leave my gun, and I can't just lay it in the street. So because in case someone else come off the building and I'm going to get shot with my own shotgun. So right next to it was a tavern called the Flight Path. And behind it was a narrow strip about 2.5, 3 feet wide, the wall of the building, and about an 8-foot rockery that went to a parking lot of this tavern, or to a bank. And so I'm catching up now as there's fumbling, and this one cop runs around one direction after the bad guy. I go around the other end of the building because I know what it is. Now we got him in a pickle. And I can't see, it's pitch black. He comes running, and the cop, I found out later what he said to me. He said, he's coming your way. I couldn't see him. And so we're this close, and I headbutted him with the butt of that shotgun. Didn't phase him. He grabbed the butt and the barrel of the gun. My hands are in close. I'm trying to protect the trigger. And now I'm looking down the barrel of my gun. And so I kept my head out of the way. I knew what he was going to do. And I got my head out of the way. And shortly, this was like 30 seconds, 35 seconds of fighting, which is an eternity when you're doing it. And he puts his hand on mine, pulls up on the barrel, and it blasts over my face. And then the other officer is up on the rockery then, and he says, and we're still fighting with the shotgun. And as he's trying to rack around another round in the chamber, and I'm holding my hands closer together, which I had no leverage on it. And so the cop says, get out of the way. I said, where the hell am I going to go? And I moved my body a little bit. And I said, okay, I'm willing to take an arm shot here. I'm spent. And he shoots the guy twice and he drops, but he laid that barrel on my arm. I had powder burns and, bleeding from my arm from that. But I never carried a shotgun again after that in my car. I didn't want anything to do with one. Wow. But I was off for a couple of weeks, and I had all I could do to climb back in a police car. But went away. I just stay away from the shotguns, and I did.
Yeah. So I asked a couple more questions as we wrap this up. I asked this to a lot of my guests just because it gives the audience a different kind of feeling on who you are, and instead of just being a one-trick pony law enforcement guy, if you could do anything, a dream job, and it couldn't be anything with law enforcement, negotiation, nothing nonprofit, is there a dream job that you would love to do someday?
Wow. I don't know. I think I'm where I need to be. I mean, do I want to be a cruise boat captain and I say, you got to remember my stage of life, and to where the kids that we're focusing this on is that, I'm 70 and I feel like I'm 50, and I keep that perspective, and I've just, I don't know if it's that streak, that I stay focused. I was married once, divorced, single for 20 years. I've been married to my Swiss wife now for 15 years as of last week, and I'm a grandfather, and the family side of things is important to me, and what I do right now is important, and I think I found my niche and to make the difference that I want to make.
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, you're not retired, but you chose to get back into this because it's a cause. It's what you wanted to do. So you are where you are because of what you want. One more question, or two more questions. The second to last is just because human trafficking is such a heavy topic for me, and it seems to be a very popular one right now, especially with the movie. And how do we destroy this? How do we get rid of this problem? I mean, is this something that's always going to be around? I mean, I talked to you a little bit about, if I was in this line of work, I would want to go after the top of the top guys, the white collar guys that are funding. And, I wonder why those people are still living. And it would seem that the people on the good side of the fence knows who those people are. And you kept talking about doing the right thing and having compassion. And I guess to me, I feel like those people have crossed the line, and that's just my take. But exactly. how do you make, I don't want to make a dent. Like I see Caviezel often talking about just educating, but like, how do we fix this problem?
Yeah, good question. And I think, there is plans out there. I think people have to unite. We can't work in silos anymore. I bring the technology side of things and the relationship building with some other governments. And I think we end up having to follow the money. And I think the FBI works very well this way, is that they, and not just in human trafficking, just in developing their cases, is that they start a little lower and then expect people to work off their, I call it working off their beef, their crime, and to get to the next level. And then it comes to following the money. And I think our app, we're getting mid to higher level people that people will turn on, because like I said, these cultures that we're dealing with, that I mentioned from South Asia through all the way through to Western Europe are and into the United States, a lot of them, because they have different belief systems and different religions and things like that, is that they don't necessarily like each other. So I'm actually hoping that some of them will end up giving us some anonymous tips on some people that they don't particularly care for too. And I think that's coming. That's
an interesting thing. You talk about values. And then the other thing is, like, let's say you have this very poor family, and they're barely able to even buy food. Like there's, you hear about the mom and dad sending their daughters away to the city I can't imagine the mindset of someone wanting to do that. But I think the other thing is, sometimes us living in an amazing country like we do, we may not have the knowledge and lens that a lot of these people in these third world countries have, who are in survival mode. And so I suppose if we were in survival mode, not to say we would condone trafficking, but we would do things maybe differently. So I think there's probably an education there that people need to be aware of.
I agree with you. And I think in some of these countries too, you take a poor farmer in some country somewhere that's a very developing country, and the traffickers come to them. Oh, you've got 3 daughters. Let me take them and educate them, and we'll give you money. And they're just not haven't been educated enough or smart enough to know what they're going to do with their daughters or sons, for that matter. And or the other side of that coin is, value of life is different. Oh, okay, sorry, honey, you have to go with them because the rest of us have to eat, and they're going to give us money, which is unthinkable to me. But we know that happens too.
I'm glad I just thought of this with your app. I guess not to pour rain on or water on this or whatever, but with technology, I guess one of the things I would think about, just because people, with all the identity theft, breaking in, the fraud, whatever, how hard is it to keep those texts going to the right people? Like, I would think that the criminals and the evil people would find a way to intercept or somehow get access to these texts. How do you make sure they go into the right hands? Well,
it's been tried, I know, well over 100 times, and they've not been able to get through the firewalls. And the part that it's not so much is somebody else trying to hack in. The hard part for us is find those trusted policemen, the trusted investigators. We take the tips and filter them to the trusted cop. Our person in Moldova will take those tips, get them to the trusted cop, because like I've mentioned before, I said, if those tips get in the wrong hands, could be very counterproductive. That's why I'm worried about like I mentioned about the South Sudan. I don't want those going. I don't want what we're doing to be to do anywhere cause more harm by going into the wrong hands.
Yeah, I get it. What's your advice as we end this? Anything that you want to say to somebody that's entertaining either law enforcement, or maybe they want to pick a cause like human trafficking and devote their life to it in a nonprofit? Any advice that you want to leave the audience with before we end this?
I would say, do your research, ensure this is what you want to do. Hopefully come in with an open, caring mindset. And the rescue and the the information part of things that we're working on is different than what the education side of things that are happening. So there's several different avenues, and hey, get a hold of me. I'm james.fuda@crimestoppers.com. Get a hold of me. I'll be happy to talk to you one-on-one if you're interested. I mean, I'll talk to anybody that'll listen to me about some of this stuff. So if you have any questions, email them to me, or we can set up a time to talk. I'd be happy to.
Yeah. Anything else, or you feel pretty good?
I feel good. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Jim, thanks so much for coming on.
Right.